Tommy Hughes, it is a pleasure and a privilege to see you here live because we had only a glimmer of the depths that is our potential connections at Confluence. And I'm so immensely grateful for that encounter with your lovely wife, Sophia, and and then the adventure that took each of us on from there. Being in Confluence, I think I like that. Being in Confluence, being in that togetherness, in that gathering of streams and the power therein was really a singular event for me. Even having been there last year, this was something completely different. And then you compounded that experience with something similar yet wholly different, being at the Elementals gathering in the Ozarks of Missouri. And so, of all the places we could commence this conversation, I'm inclined to invite you to expand and expound upon those two experiences for you, if you have anything to compare and contrast those events to, because I'm hard pressed to describe, for instance, Confluence as a freedom festival. I don't know how you describe Elementals to people or Confluence to people. I think it's completely reasonable, and I take this from my work of studying Steiner, that it's not always important that we name a thing. It's not always important that we bring the exact articulation of what our experiences are to bear, because everyone has their own different ways of decoding whatever message we're bringing. So, and still we do our best. So if you'll start us off, Tommy, with your highlights and surprises and reflections from those two epic events to start this year. And with that, welcome, my friend.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Tom, for having me. And indeed, what a beautiful connection. It was, I believe, kind of last day or
Yeah.
so at Confluence that we were able to meet and connect. And like I had shared with you when we first met, Sophia and I had kind of saw you walking around, and there was just, you know how you get that feel, especially at Confluence, there's some kindred spirit. Just it just feels like, oh, I was friends with that person in the past, or we're gonna kind of become friends right away, kind of just glide right into a conversation that we may have never even had yet, or perhaps in the past. And it certainly felt that way with you. So I'm very happy we got to meet, and I
Very
encourage,
much the same. Thank you.
yeah, yeah, I encouraged Sophia at the time to join the Be Here Forum,
Hmm.
in the yurt, and that's how you all met, and then that
Yeah.
connection. So that was fantastic.
Exactly. I think it was during maybe Dr. Stephen Hussey's
I think
talk.
so.
Yeah, which
Yeah,
otherwise I would not have missed if not
yeah,
for
I know.
my deep friendship with Jared Picard of Be Here Farm and Nature. So,
Yes, yes.
because there were now, did you, not to diverge us too much or not to distract us too much? Did you attend that talk, and maybe we can come back to if you gleaned any new insight on the physical and metaphysical power of the heart? Was that anything that you tuned into?
Yeah, I can't recall exactly the talk. I don't know if it was Dr. Stephen Hussey's yet with the when the Be Here Now Farms Yurt
Hmm.
was going on. It was definitely a talk because so I was sitting on the ground and Sophia had left, but I can't
Yeah,
recall now. It's a bit of a blur. But definitely have dived into his material in his book. I've got it on the shelf here. So yeah, we can
good.
touch on that perhaps later. From a Chinese medical point of view as well, the heart is interesting. But yeah, back to your question, the confluence. You use the word epic. I think that would be perfect in all of its definitions. Epic in the sense of the idea of an epic, like a story, perhaps,
Hmm.
as well as just epic in general of excitement and just a grand nature. So that was my first time at Confluence. Sophia and I, that was our first time. We drove down there, and it was everything we expected and more. I would agree with your description of a freedom festival. There was certainly a different feel there of much more of a matured, and I don't mean that in any derogatory sense, but more of a matured sense of freedom. Whereas there was, at Elementals to compare different vibes. Folks were on all different levels there, and it was more of a sort of coming together of sorts. Most people describe it as an alchemical event. And, I kind of envision it as all these alchemists have been sort of hermits at times, and they've kind of all
Hmm.
come to share their work. And I think there was a similar energetic to the audience as well. Folks on different pages, some very similar baseline, but it sparked certainly great new discussion and kind of some differing understandings of things. So confluence, perhaps a little more coherence and kind of the stream of consciousness there in one direction, Whereas elementals, especially it being a first year brand new festival, it was very much like the description of the four elements, where there was folks representing each of its own particular element, and there's different energies involved with that element, different energies with those individuals. So I think that's how I would describe it, but both fantastic events, great conversations, good people.
And thank you for that. Step back to compare and contrast the two because our mutual friend Nikki Leach said he had a really tremendous time with you both, and alluded to that as well. The distinctions being, and maybe part of it is that Elementals, yeah, was in its virgin phase, in its novel phase,
Yep.
and still what Topher described as having the avant-garde, having the cutting edge of several different fields, very much, I mean, a contingent that is aligned in a lot of respects. And I would imagine that is something that does, I was going to say dissect, but again, the distinction between having people that aren't fully aligned, and Confluence has that as well. I think just there's maybe because of how these several years that it's been running, there is a little bit more of the coherence around certain themes. And yet, I think, actually, I know what we depend upon are those are they may seem competitive or truly contrasting viewpoints, and we talked a little bit just before we went live here about some of them. I know that we do depend on that, Tommy, because otherwise, and there have been criticisms from the outside looking in of something like Confluence or the Way Forward or the Terrain Camp, etc., of people being extremists or people being too borderline cultish in terms of the exclusion. And there is an element, of course, as we know, where we are relying on our faculties of discernment to say yes to some things and no to others. And that doesn't mean that those are definitive lifelong yeses and nos where we don't permit anything else to enter our consciousness and move us from our positions. So I love the sound of elementals being that level of variety, of diversity in the right way, in the good way. And so is there anything else, or is there anything specifically that stood out to you that maybe, and maybe you didn't go into elementals with any expectations, but something that, because I like to ask people, Tommy, when they go on trips or they go to these special events, is what's a highlight for you and what's a surprise? What's something that really took you to a place that you did not expect to go? So what was a seminal surprise from the elementals gathering?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say some of the speakers that I thought might not pique my interest as much, or some of the discussions, I was really interested, which I thought I wasn't so much at the time, in brother Marty Leeds material,
Yeah.
um, and not really being too keen, knowing somewhat of what he discussed in some of his material, but not being well steeped in it or kind of following it for long. He had a nice Sunday sermon on Sunday morning there, and that really went quite deep, and it really kind of brought a lot of the other talks together.
Hmm.
So that was a great surprise. And then, of course, just the elation of the connections and the conversation. There was a lot more downtime, I would say, available here at Elemental. So there was a lot of great conversation and discussion to be had outside of talks. Not as perhaps busy, so to speak. So yeah, I would say that was a major surprise for me. Some of the talks.
That's special.
Yeah.
And I've engaged with Marty's work a little bit.
Yeah.
What was so impactful for you in terms of that? Was it just timing, and maybe, like you said, you weren't especially seeking that type of insight? And I think it's a remarkable achievement, and it's usually pure serendipity when, and that was my memory from the first Confluence, when you have talks that seem to blend so effortlessly together, that there are, and without much collaboration from the speakers. I mean, so what was his theme or motif that you felt was an excellent summary of what you were all experiencing there?
It's a reminder for cross culturally, because my background is really steeped even from a young age within the Chinese tradition.
Mm.
So that's kind of been my my focus. And so sometimes, even for a time younger, being turning away from sort of the Western traditions, especially the more religious and philosophical traditions, to go into the East for a while. And then finally, through Steiner's work later on in my life, kind of coming back to it. But Marty's talk was a good reminder that the same material, cosmological, astrological material, that's so prevalent within the Chinese tradition, and kind of what I base a lot of my work with, even on a clinical level, is still there in the allegorical sense of the Bible and its descriptions of the stars, of the astrology, of the cosmology, and how that, even from the Western tradition, comparing, contrasting that with the Eastern tradition, we see that just across the realm in its entirety. All of these ancient traditions really, really focused on the stars, really focused on the cosmological influence, microcosm, so to speak,
Mm.
upon the microcosm. So it was another reminder that there's still absolute fruit to bear within the Western tradition, and a reminder to kind of call me back into that as well, compare, contrast, share, to build an even deeper understanding of all this with the East and West kind of combined on that level. So that was really beautiful to see and be reminded of.
That's brilliant. And I'm smiling over here because I'm so thankful. And this is the levity of life. This is the connections that we never foresee coming,
Mm,
because that has been a theme. It seems very recent. I mean, you know how it is, Tommy. Sometimes a day feels like a lifetime.
yeah,
And so much of that is the richness of your inner life, where you see things align or you see things depart from one another, and it calls you into focus. It calls you into open focus to determine what do you see as whether it's natural laws or just like to stay on the topic of themes of your life. And I've been revisiting the experience, especially in my 20s, and Topher Gardner always talks about this, that it's so easy to be idealistic and black and white and, fairly rigid in your views, because you are seeking some level of, this is my philosophy, this is my religion, this is my mission, etc. And because I profess a vocation of holistic health, I find myself on that similar track as you, of coming back to so many aspects of my lived experience, or even uh, aspects that I've put on the shelf for a while, and have intended to revisit, of what have I ignored completely that really does not deserve to be ignored. What have I considered to be useless, that is just folly to think that there's nothing there. And so you talk about, coming back to what are the elements of Western culture, Western medicine, Western philosophy, religion, that we can still use and unite. And this is why I'm also thankful for Steiner's work to find that balance between two extremes. And I joke with people, I say, especially whether it's coaching tennis or anything, if I say, here are the two extremes, where's the middle? And it's not always perfect middle. It's everything in between. There's so much space to occupy in the middle. And so of all the places we can journey to now, you said that from a young age you had the tremendous, I think we can call it a gift,
yes,
to be, well, for this experience, for your soul, to have access to what many of us would consider to be alternate. I like saying alternate instead of alternative.
yeah,
Alternate ways of considering healing, considering disease, considering, and then from my perspective, Tommy, a holistic view of health, or really any view of health that we choose to adopt, is what has been the greatest portal for me to then consider my relationship to freedom, which we'll talk about, and therefore
mm,
law, my relationship to relationships, my relationship to so much else that is considered outside of me. And I really now cannot fathom a life where I'm not considering all those to be other elements of health, because health is really, for me, synonymous with life. So if you'll take us back early in your biography to what you first recognized as your perspective, your learned perspective, or even your innate perspective of health versus disease, and where that launched you to from there.
absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Um, Gosh, so fortunate, so blessed, constantly have to give recognition and gratitude to my masters and my teachers and those that come before me to guide me upon this path. And thanks to God as well for this, this aspect of one's destiny, so to speak. And so growing up in northern Kentucky, a small town, very small town, and one wouldn't think that the Chinese culture would be present in a small town like that, especially it being much more the kind of Christian tradition, very closed off. But sure enough, in a hole in a wall, there existed, sounds like the beginning of The Hobbit or something, right? The hero's journey.
Yeah.
In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. But yeah, a hole in a wall, which used to be an old car garage with, oozy green stuff coming out of the floor. There existed a small Chinese martial arts school, a type of Shaolin martial arts. And really interesting story, perhaps for another time, of how that found its way into Kentucky as a region. But you wanted to do everything your friends were doing at the time. So 7, 8 years old, your friends doing, karate,
Hmm.
and you're like, I don't want to do that. So you go and you give it a try, and something turns on inside your soul, and you stick with it for some reason. You just feel magnetic toward it. And so early on, I got to witness. We typically see martial arts, especially in the West, somewhat void of its spiritual roots. And so it's more focused on the martial,
Hmm.
and not the idea of the heart and the will and the spirit, which is very prevalent in a lot of the Eastern martial arts, especially within the Chinese martial arts. So fortunately, I was dove into that. And so there was a big aspect there of the physical health. So it first started with the physicality first. It started with, how can I increase my potential physically? How can I enhance my training? How can I become stronger, faster, more acute, etc.? And so that's what most of my instructors and masters and elder students were interested in at the time. So they started talking about, you don't need soda pop, don't drink that. I witnessed early on, my master had one of the students hold a packet of sugar and do sort of like a kinesiological muscle test. And
Mm.
you got to see that, the student was pushed down to the ground holding the sugar. And then when he took the sugar out of the hand, he was able to withstand the pressure. So it kind of like was burned into my mind. And then standing facing the wall for months and months as your sort of as sort of your entryway into the practice to see if to make or break you, so to speak.
Hmm.
Standing at the wall, sure enough, with as destiny would have it, giant, life-size posters of human anatomical figures with acupuncture points all over them. And so just staring there, not knowing at all what that is, just a young man, Kentucky, just sort of absorbing that into my into my
Yeah.
matrix, and so that stuck with me. And so early on, health for me was very physical. It was, how many more seconds can I go doing this particular movement or this particular exercise? How much quicker can I be than the other students at this? And then how's my recovery? So it started off very physical, which I'm certainly grateful for, because and I believe it's
Yes.
designed in the Eastern traditions to develop the physical first so that you have a vessel to work with as you get into the immaterial, which can be a little trickier. And when you slow things down, I always say it actually makes it a little harder, especially in our culture where we're so used to go, go, go. So
What?
health,
Why is
yeah,
that? Do you think? Why would slowing down create a difficulty?
yeah. So there's this aspect, you go from these fast movements, like what folks might consider, in like the Japanese word is like a kata or a movement.
Mhm.
You go from fast to slow, and all of a sudden, with slow, there's an aspect of noticing and an aspect of awareness, new senses that perhaps you weren't aware of or acutely tuned to. And so when you're doing a movement, you start to notice, oh, wow, I thought my hand was at this position, but as I start to slow it down, I've noticed that I'm like way off track here. So there's a new sense of awareness and acuity to that. So it adds more data points on. So there's more bandwidth, I guess. But then from a spiritual perspective, my current understanding, at least, of what I've kind of been thinking and meditating on is we sort of come into this realm from the immaterial into the material. And then we sort of have to journey back into that process of material back to immaterial. So we see it in our culture. We see the loss of ether, the loss of consciousness within the sciences and even in the arts. And so we've gone from this flesh, this material body. there's some sort of difficulty kind of coming back to and bringing together into unity those two pieces again. So it's almost as if I think one piece our culture, so what is it, left brained or whatever side that is, that's more
Yeah.
focused, on the mechanical. So it's just different for us in our culture. I think it might be easier for some of the Eastern traditions. And then also just being a physical being in this realm, I think difficult to slow things down and come into resonance with the processes that are much more immaterial, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you for that. And so
Yeah.
don't let me take you too far afield
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I just found that fascinating
Yeah.
because as to why it would be more difficult. And I think
Right.
what comes up for me when you describe it is that is difficult for people to slow down and become even more aware. What are the ways? Because then it's humbling. Is like you said, even if it's just something, gosh, I really thought my hand. This is why video and coaching tennis is so vital
Yeah.
because even my description to people is your arm is here, your hips are there, your head is there. Until you see it, you really have no idea. And of course, what else comes up for me that as I'm putting together my pamphlets and pitch decks and offerings for my services now,
Yeah.
one thing that came through in terms of how I would distill what it is that I'm offering is like you, my first portal into health was through the body. Is what is physical excellence? What does physical potential mean to me? And that only goes to a level before you start to I imagine for many of us before you start to unlock well what is my inner life then to support my outer life. And I've come to describe what I do is that I teach body awareness that leads to self-awareness.
Hmm.
And that is where the self-teaching comes in. Is I'm teaching one thing, you'll teach yourself the rest once you develop that greater body awareness. And that a healthy body is a sensitive body, right? Because that means that you're able to receive as as many data points as you can handle. That's why I talk about open focus. Open focus is a meditative practice that you may know. It takes you into your body and you go through. I mean, yeah, can I feel the volume of my big toe? And then can I feel the volume of my big toe as it relates to the other four toes? Can I feel those four toes as it relates to the whole foot and all the way up your body? And also in terms of vision, and this is best done outside, I implore people to do so, can I gaze straight ahead without fixating on any one point, and how much of my vision field can I drink in without, like I said, without focusing anywhere? It's beyond peripheral vision. You come to understand how much more vision you have. Steiner talks about, can you see? Can you use the eyes in the back of your head? Can you use the eyes of your back? Can you use the eyes of your heart? All those different fields that require that you do slow down. Because if you swing a racket as hard as you can, Tommy, as fast as you can, good luck telling me what your lat was doing, what your shoulders were doing, what your core was doing. Good luck. So I'm very much aligned with you, encouraging people to slow down. So to help you follow that train as well. So your beginning was in the physical, and it was
Yeah.
in pursuit of performance and excellence. Where did that take you then?
Yeah, so then beautiful, transition developed in the Eastern martial arts is, okay, you've been doing all these things for years with with vigor and with force. With we have yin and yang, everyone knows this symbol. Very yang, this sort of masculine, intense, fiery, sun, hot energy. Now we're going to add in this other piece that's important, this yin piece, the feminine, the quiet, the solitude, the gentle. And so a beautiful transition in the training is, okay, now we're going to slow things down and we're going to go. You've constantly been looking outward at how to defend and what are the threats on the outward side. Now we're going to identify the so-called, I don't even really perhaps like that term, threats, or we're going to more so perhaps identify weaknesses or imbalances on the inside. And all of a sudden when you start to transition into that, you go from what you thought was so difficult, like how much longer can I stand in this horse stance, or how much I'm pouring sweat and it's so intense. Now you go into something and you think, holy cow, all that other stuff was so easy because I had that I had that feeling, that feel. I could, I could I could breathe and I could, transition my body a certain way. I could make an adjustment. Now I slow everything down. I'm simply with myself and that is it. Maybe I'm sitting, maybe I'm standing, whatever it might be. But now I'm simply with this internal environment that I might not have developed a deeper relationship with yet in my life. And so now we get to add this piece that we haven't come into contact so much with before. So all of a sudden you start to compare that with what was before and you say, wow, this is actually quite a bit more difficult, perhaps on a different level of difficulty or a different aspect, but all the same difficult. And so you start to do practices, like even Steiner has in a lot of his original works, like different internal practices that start to develop new senses and bring new awareness and start to hone in, maybe starting with the mind. And the mind
Hmm.
still is a good physical bridge. I feel like the mind is this bridge in between the material and immaterial. And then you get into more immaterial things such as the chi body or the energetic body or the essences or the shin in Chinese, like the spirit. You start to get more into more visceral, more etheric type aspects. So you don't have as much to hold on to look at, to feel, to touch. And so you're left with these senses that have not been so developed in our culture. So yeah, beautiful transition, setting it up from the physical so that you can handle the body. And as they say, a saying in Chinese martial arts is, don't boil an empty kettle. So you start to develop what's inside the kettle before you start to put it through intense training. And in some ways, some of the training's a bit backwards if folks take it a little too physical in the beginning. If you haven't developed the inner resources and energy and you just go
Yeah.
hardcore, kind of one-sided, pure yang, you can burn the kettle out. But so there's a fine balance there.
I was going to say that I can see that as well, that would maybe seem a little misguided, and still it can reveal to you that there is so much more work to be done to cultivate the inner resources, the potentially boundless, unlimited resources. I mean, I often use the language of which, without having too much of an education for the vocabulary and the depth of something like Chinese medicine, but to talk about blockages versus flow, in that chi experience, and what I talked about, for example, with the difference between the embodiment practices that are now being offered through being human in your body versus qigong. I mean, I did when I was at Confluence last year, Tommy, I was I think about 30 or 40 days into a 100-day gong of qigong,
Nice.
10, 12 minutes or so, and that was the first of my life. Right now I'm 80, soon to be 82 days into 100 days of breath work, which is another first for me.
Sweet.
And I describe that as general energy cultivation. What
Yes.
the embodiment practices, as inspired by Steiner, are are stimulating of specific inner life processes of thinking, willing, equanimity, positivity, harmony, etc. And so some of the great feedback I got from presenting those to bring it back into the pot for us, into the kettle for us, is that would serve athletes so well to because yes, even though they are physical movements, they are nourishing an inner flow of energy specific too, because
Right.
I love that the arc that you described does take you to the place of the mind, because when I was offering this to a group of athletes the other night, beach handball players, for my friend Matt Coleman,
Yeah.
what one of the embodiment practices that I homed in on was the thinking practice, and I said, not thinking in the way that we may conceptualize thinking, which is I'm going to think about this pass before I make it. As you know, as an athlete, you're really hard pressed to think about a strike, to think about a maneuver, to think about any movement before or while you're doing it. I had this conversation yesterday on the tennis court. Is that at the highest levels of tennis, what they say where they feel they're most restricted is thinking about how to hit a shot,
Mm.
the technique of how to hit a shot.
Yep.
That type of thinking is something that you do your best to weave into your embodied life, right? Because otherwise, if we don't have nearly the bandwidth to think about how, as well as when, as well as where, when we're talking about executing a shot in tennis. And still, we are called to practice a level of clear and sharp thinking in unity with with our body mind that becomes, we say subconscious. I don't know if that's really the term that I embrace. So all of this to say, I do find it fascinating, though, that it goes from the physical and the outer expression, whatever those capacities are, then inward. And who were you at this time? I mean, how did you feel like you emerged from this practice? It's remarkable, and I'm grateful that you had the type of teachers that took you through this lineage and took you through this arc. Ha- do you feel like you've emerged from that? I mean, do you feel like you're still in the dojo, or where did you find yourself on the other side of all that training?
Yeah, it just beautiful. And real briefly too, just for the
Wait,
audience too, it makes me, when you shared what you just did, it makes me also think of Paul Chek's terminology, working in versus working out,
yes.
right? We love that. We love that term. But yeah, what I found was without knowing any of these terminologies or definitions or terms as a young man and going through all of this was much later on. I added the definitions and the explanations, so I was just left with feeling really, and I'm grateful for that. That was a beautiful process. You know, even the Taoists talk about that, like quit labeling everything and naming things, and just what's left
Mhm.
with the feeling. So I was blessed to get a process where I didn't know any of the definitions or terms. I didn't know, oh yeah, how about I try and do this with my Kundalini or whatever terms. Sometimes that gets in our way. But I had merged in such a way, looking back on all of it, of it was really developing the individual. You know, the martial is certainly focused on the individual because it's you. It's just you in that moment, and you have guides and in courses and classes you have in the in that sense perhaps teammates, and that you're being a bit competitive, and that's a wonderful development to train with others. And at the end of the day, you're left with just the self. And so that was a really deep individuation process for me, and more importantly, growing up in that. Again, what a blessing, gosh, to grow up in that. How fortunate to allow, which we lack certainly in our culture, the initiation process, especially for young males. And so I went through an initiation process, divinely, perfectly timed at this transition period of, they adopted and utilized the Japanese belt system just for the Western audience. Just for some reason, the West kind of likes goals and setups. In traditional
Yeah.
Chinese martial arts, there's really no belt system. There's more so development. But anyway, just for our understanding, there was a use of a belt system in there for the Western audience. And when you kind of cross the threshold from what they call a lower belt into upper belt, that's at this brown belt level. So the next belt series after that will be the black belt. And so at the brown belt level, there was a initiation process, and that was no one, you didn't know what it was. It was always behind closed doors. So there was mystery
Mm.
involved to it. And so you had to deal with what that felt like inside of you. And then when you got in there, your elders were present, and that was it. There was no folks lower than you. And so you're crossing this threshold into this initiatory process. Again, very important for young men, young women as well. But
Mhm.
on this physical level for the young men, what can I accomplish? What do I becoming now? And so you just felt different after you had left that. So I left in this way of feeling very individuated, very strong in my I force in a positive way. And then this next stage or so was this development, I think, for me, was the development of the heart and the development of kind of transitioning from, in the traditional trajectory, they talk about transitioning from you've learned to hurt people, now you have to learn to heal. So there was a process too of like, we've learned all the destructive capacities of this, and what's the restorative building capacities. And so we're going to build on the outside, and on the inside, we're going to build and nourish the spirit. So that training began after that, and that just, yeah, it just added to the wholeness, the holism aspect of it all. Yeah.
I'm feeling a twinge of the poverty of rituals of
Mm.
initiation that we lack,
Yep.
and especially as young men,
Yep.
because and I'll share one especially poignant reflection that comes up for me, Tommy, when you talk about
Yeah.
that your eye force was so well developed at that moment, and
Yep.
still, because this is where I'm grappling at the moment, is because I heard someone say, for all that we have come to promote about individuation
Yep.
processes and the relationship to the self, so much of the, I believe, useful rhetoric in the terrain space is radical self-authorship and authority, is
Right.
take it all on you, that there's really nothing, be it, you know, be it Satan or Savior, that's out there beyond you. It really is on you. And that can be a very lonely place.
Yep.
And so the benefit of the ritual of initiation that you describe is that you had elders there waiting for you to say, okay, there are people here beyond me, above me, next to me. And I believe that's part of it too, is that you're not initiated into solitude, you're initiated into belonging. And you'll still have to walk that path yourself. And so I was keen to speak to that because that was very alive for me just as recently as today. If you'll follow and add as much as you like, otherwise, please follow your footsteps into that long and noble journey from your head to your heart. What has that looked like? And let's use this as the invitation to bring in what you've learned through your studies of Chinese medicine about what a dynamic organ, which doesn't tell the whole story, because we use these descriptions of, yes, to go from your head to your heart, the heart as almost this like we said, this place, this terrain, and yet it's also an organ. It has very real function in the body, maybe not as they've been described to us in the past as a pump and as something that is easily clogged by cholesterol and all of that. I was disabused. I was at least disabused of some of that narrative at some point in college. Just taking, I've talked about this before. I'm so grateful to this professor I had, and it was at University of Massachusetts, Boston. I mean, it wasn't a naturopathic school or anything like that. But on day one, I think within 10 minutes, I mean, he's talking about his fasting regimen. He's probably 70, fairly vital, you could tell, and talking about his fasting regimen and his water. And I think he opens up one of our first lectures with, when you see the two words, studies show, there should be alarm bells ringing loudly in your mind to understand. And so I was grateful to him for that. And he also, I remember him because I keep a hard copy of it. One of the first real and accurate criticisms of the whole cholesterol myth, of the fact that there's really no, correlation. So that at least gave me some nudges. And okay, there's some skepticism that is warranted instead of thinking that everything is settled, especially with something as serious as the heart.
Right.
So on the personal hero's journey level of traveling from the head to the heart, what did that journey like, and where has that led you to a deeper understanding of what the paradigm and philosophies of Chinese medicine have enlightened you as to the form and function of the heart?
Yeah, beautiful. So, this personal journey, this transition period now, you start to get into more of the what we would call the internal arts within the Chinese martial arts system. So we kind of have this outward expression that kind of resembles what most people I think in the West are familiar with, like Karate Kid or these movies and things, kicking and punching and moving around and jumping. And now we start to go into more body mind, heart based forms. And so folks are familiar with concepts and practices like Tai Chi, Qigong, that would be an example. And then we have more maybe foreign, understandings of forms and styles of martial arts called like Bagua, which is like, circle walking. Or we have a very important one here that'll lead us into this is Xini. In Chinese, the heart is Xin, Xin, and then Yi is like the will or intention. And so most people would know it as Xingyi. It's form, intention, fist. But an ancient version of this that I was, again, blessed to be exposed to was Xini, which is heart, will, fist. Fist afterwards just representing it's a type of martial art. And so this is starting to develop the breath with the body, and then with two new forces, the heart and the will. Kind of some overlap here in the Steiner tradition. These concepts and terms come up. But in Chinese, the story goes, as my master elucidated, is this development of a martial arts system was found by observing animals. And this is kind of how like almost all these old stories go. Like Tai Chi was like a crane and a snake fighting and how they move so gracefully. Whereas Shini was two male chickens, roosters, cockfighting, so to speak. And what is amazing about that, I don't endorse cockfighting.
Too
But
bad.
yeah. having chickens of our own and a beautiful rooster that has a great heart and a good embodiment of that energy. But I don't endorse that. But what they observed in ancient times, seeing this, was that these male roosters would just absolutely not give up when they were just completely battered, bruised, and bleeding. They would not give up, and they likened it to understanding that in the battle they would use their heart. So their heart, I'm going at this, and when the heart level would lower and falter a little bit, they'd come in with what they'd call the will. And so just the will to continue, just this deep, more physical animalistic energy, and then the heart comes back in. That's more that spiritual, that's that consciousness. And so they would keep alternating between those energies. And at the time, the story goes, this famous Chinese general was observing that, and he then taught his army this style of martial art to say, in battle, we're going to utilize this concept of the heart and the will. So when you feel like all is lost and you can't continue, and your heart wavers, that emotional side of it, my morale's low, we're not going to win this. Bring the will back in, let the will come forth. And then when that lowers again, bring back in the heart and kind of keep nourishing each other in that way.
Hmm.
So beautifully, I got exposed to this process, and it's using the breath and the movement and the organ systems and the channels and all of that. And so again, it develops simultaneously the internal and the external, the working in, the working out. And then observing, I think just the nature within the martial tradition of, I really learned this from Joel Schaefer. He helped fine tune my wording around this, because my whole life was, when I did teach later on in my teens, they said, how do you become so disciplined? How do you develop self-discipline? Everyone knows those terms, especially in the martial world. I could never really propose a good answer. It just felt like something from inside out, and it wasn't so much a practice or a list or you had to hold yourself to and be so rigid and hard upon yourself. At least it wasn't for me. Certainly for others they did that, and there was a lack of heart in there, I would say. But when Joel Schaefer started to use the term impeccable, being impeccable, I said, yep, that's it. That's what it was, is this impeccability nourished by the general tenets within the martial tradition of respect and honor, and respecting especially the elders and the wisdom that comes before, and taking on, to come back to a point that you made so important, especially relevant in the terrain space, that of self-responsibility, self, like, it's me and it's only me, and I'm going to take ownership. Even in the natural law world, I'm going to take ownership for my transgressions and my trespassing. I'm going to own that. I'm going to take the responsibility, and that brings that true freedom then. And so that's developed in the martial world as well. It's extreme ownership and extreme responsibility, and oftentimes perhaps even to an imbalance. Found this in myself later on in life, doing some more internal work and healings around. It almost got to the point too where you keep your head down so much, and you're so used to not speaking up and speaking out. That shadow side of that came later on in my life, in the schooling out west, when there was a time to speak out and speak up, and there was authority involved. And so it harkened back to my process in the martial world of, there's an authority, and you keep your head down and you stand in your stance and you say, yes, master, even if like, that's not right. But there's some beauty to that, and just to recognize the wholeness of it, there is a shadow side to that. And we see this in the Asian traditions and the Asian sort of culture and populations as well, very much focused around filial piety, which means mom and dad are always right.
Yes.
And even if you want to go against that, that's a great taboo. So I start to get into this process of, okay, now I'm elevating in terms of rank and in terms of responsibility. How am I going to go about this with the heart and with the will? How am I going to incorporate that? Because I'm starting to now witness as I age and grow and learn and develop perhaps more wisdom and less knowledge. I'm looking around and I'm seeing missing pieces. I'm seeing not a completion within some of my instructors and some of the folks that are higher up in the systems of, once they take their outfit off and leave the dojo, so to speak, who are you
Yeah.
in that world? Do you carry that? So that was really important to me to develop and carry that as part of my being in all aspects, not just on the training floor. So we get into that heart, we get into that will, and then if there's anything you have to say, I can go into then in a moment here the schooling, and that's this kind of next phase on the hero's journey, to use that term.
Please, yeah, follow your footsteps on that. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm reveling in the accuracy, it feels like,
yeah,
of impeccability.
yeah,
Is because, yeah,
impeccability.
I know everyone loves to talk about discipline and
Discipline,
self-discipline, and
right?
that really does go beyond just whatever your practice is. Is you make it a lot simpler on yourself when your goal is, and you're also alluding to when you do miss the mark, whether it's because of your forced habits or rigidity, a different type of discipline, a discipline that is where you subjugate yourself to, because that's discipline, right?
Right.
Is to discipline yourself to not refute what someone of a position of perceived authority says. And
Mhm.
yeah, these are the shadow sides to all of it, which I know the heart will help us unveil. So yeah, so then what did the education lead you to within yourself as well?
Yeah, and briefly on that, I'm sure you're
Please.
acutely aware and had your forays in these cultures. I certainly did at a time. It certainly appeals to the masculine energies out there, but folks, that's the kind of hustle culture. That's the Jocko Willink. That's the David
Yep.
Goggins. That's the, we've all,
Yeah, oh yeah.
many of us in the athletic world or in physical cultures have definitely been there. And what we find, at least in my understanding of it, is certainly an imbalance there as well. There's a lack of heart, and there's a high potentiality for physical injury as we pass, as
That's
we
an understatement.
as we surpass the
Yeah.
listening to the inner knowing that says, "Hey, take a break." This hustle culture continues on, and so that's why I've fallen out of favor, perhaps, with the word discipline, because that's Jocko's
Yeah.
branding as like it's like hardcore discipline. Yeah, his book is Discipline Equals Freedom, and
Right.
there's certainly truth to that, as Dr.
Yes.
Moshe says. All truths are half truths. There's certainly beauty and truth in that,
Indeed.
and there's the I'm going to burn the hell out of my adrenals, get up at 4 a.m. every single day, even in the winter, and
Yep.
jump right into hardcore weightlifting. That's totally out of alignment with the seasonal energetics and just the energetics of my body in general. And so we have to be careful of that as well, of imbalances that look like discipline and I'm getting my life together.
Yeah.
It's another side of that being. Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah. So yeah, I have this good foundation. Again, so blessed and grateful for my teachers and the lineage and the setting up of being exposed to some of this early on. And so it's like, okay, the very next step forward, right, is this development of martial artist, healer, philosopher, sage, etc. This development. So it's time to go kind of like the path of a sort of scholar, warrior scholar position they talk a lot about in Chinese medicine. And so, early on, wanted to go to this school out west, one of the prime Chinese medical naturopathic schools, very famous old school naturopathic school out west. Wanted to do naturopathy, Chinese medicine, kind of a dual degree thing. It's kind of since I was, young teenager, that's what I wanted to do. Um, I think again, developing that intuition and that heart and that inside ringing resonance of truth allowed me, because people, how'd you know about this so early with, you know, some of these allopathic issues, etc. I don't know. There was just something in that martial tradition again that developed inside of me that allowed kind of that bullshit detector to be developed a little earlier. So go to this school thinking, okay, cool, I'm going to find my people. This is it. This is like the Hogwarts of natural medicine, and it's going to be amazing. And early on, that was 2018. That was before COVID, so things seemed right. But what I did notice was the early uprising of kind of the very, kind of far left, kind of. I'm not sure what terminology to really describe some of that, kind of the social justice aspects that were evident in that schooling, and especially being in Portland, Oregon, where it's kind of already leaning toward that. What I started to notice was a flip flop within the schooling where all authority, instead of this kind of nice balanced approach of respect and understanding, but then also a good aspect of, where we can debate, we can discuss, it was completely on that other side, completely flip flop to where all authority is lower than the student. And I was just witnessing many of my teachers, whom, it was a very lineage, master disciple based process there, which I thought was beautiful, very heart based, was being destroyed, and sort of like, teachers were being fired left and right for using the wrong terminology, things like that. So that was very kind of heartbreaking at first. I was already starting to have discussions with some folks there, like, what am I witnessing here? I didn't expect this. And then 2019, I went to China with my teacher. We come back, and then all of a sudden we start to hear, rumblings of, the quote, the COVID, and things start to lock down, especially on the West Coast, quickly, and schooling starts to go online. Things start to shift and change so rapidly and quickly. It's a whirlwind of energetics, so it's time to calm down, find the center. And you start to realize that everything that I thought folks believed there, everything that I thought was, the facade of the outward expression of we're into natural, or, we believe in the natural ways, was simply just I guess, I don't know, more of a hobby for most folks than a lifestyle or a mode of being. And so you start to see things shift and change very rapidly based on authority and how to respond to authority. And at a natural medical school, I always call it the once prestigious natural medical school, people start lining up for the shots, and teachers, start to, ban people from class who aren't following the proper protocols. I was one of those. And it was very heartbreaking again to realize that. And backing up a little bit, there was this, when I went to the school and first got started in what they call the structure and function courses, which is very allopathic.
Hmm.
It was so shocking and heartbreaking to me as well, of like, oh man, I got to do all this again. I already did all the pre-med crap. I thought that was like the way in. And everybody was on board with that, and the studies and the science and the ATP and the cells and all this shit
Yeah.
that's cartoons. And it's just like, am I crazy here? It was like my soul was calling me to just not even show up for exams or do well, because
Yeah.
it just felt so wrong. And certainly I was a poor student in that way, perhaps on one understanding, but certainly I just felt like, whoa, what's going on here? So that, plus the transition during COVID and the ostracizing of individuals like myself and the very few teachers that I came to love and trust and really respect, ostracizing those founders of the school, etc., trying to get them out, just because of a different idea, one that I thought we were in alignment with, because the school being called the Natural University of Natural Medicine, National, was very interesting and very heartbreaking. And so that was so-called dark night of the soul, where I had to really go inward. Now it's time to put these martial trainings and traditions to the test. It's not a physical self-defense scenario here, but it's a scenario of heart will, to come back to that. How strong is that in these scenarios? How are you going to feel when you are completely on your own? Because that is certainly the case here. So it was a blessing. It certainly was, as difficult as it may have been. Holding to the center at the time, finding connection. I'm sure this was similar for you and others out there in this world on kind of the terrain side of things. It really brought us together more. It really allowed for great conversation. It really allowed for good community and new connections, I guess, to use that term again. So there was a beautiful side to it, and there was certainly a side that was difficult to watch, where we saw this sort of new foray into what I call the Flexner Report Redux, the kind of Flexner Report 2020, where these schools, that was kind of the final nail in the coffin. And so, yeah, it was a deeper development of the heart. I went deeper into the working in process of my ideas around authority and my fear around that, and my fear of speaking out in that way. Always enjoyed public speaking, but now, how do you public speak when everybody's against you? What does that process look like? So I certainly had to learn a lot. I needed to call on others for guidance and support in that way, because it was certainly, for me, a process of now wrestling with that internal conflict with authority growing up in the martial tradition. So it got me closer and closer to that center, to openness, to understanding, to learn how to use those principles of Tai Chi, of stillness, of calmness, when I did get into possible debates or arguments. Like, how can I really approach that from the heart? Because no one's going to listen to us when you're wrong, here's why, get on my side, or, get on the road kind of thing. So it was a good exercise in openness and understanding, even when things were just absolutely, just outrageously crazy and nuts on just the surface. How can you still witness that and still be in the center and of the heart and say, okay, we're all on our own journeys. How can I bring compassion, which really has this definition underneath of understanding, to this? And many great fruits were grown from that. So that was that kind of next stage.
Thank God you have the origin story that you do, Tommy.
I'm
For
blessed.
to you certainly are, and I'm feeling the blessings of those fruits because
Yeah.
having the source of so many of your skills come from martial arts
Hmm.
philosophy. I'm seeing the profundity of that because it does equip you better to, again, which otherwise we as young men are devoid of, which is the how to marshal your resources,
Hmm.
whether it is, mostly in self-defense, even if it is something more of your spirit or something more of the parts of you that are less visible to the world. They're still very real, and they go through real experiences when it's you, your inner voice, your inner self, your inner life that's being tested. Then what abilities do we have to protect and provide and prosper still? And of all the places that we can start to begin our descent, and my relationship to time is dubious at best at the moment. What I know is that we have a little bit of it left to, at least for now, because my intention, Tommy, now is it's a privilege for me to learn so much more of your story and how it's created the crucible for you to continue to develop and grow. And then I know for our next conversation, we can expound more on the principles and philosophies with which you practice now. One of which that comes to mind, the most important F word we know, is freedom.
Hmm.
And I would invite at this time your inner feelings on freedom. And does it have, I mean, is there anything in your education for Chinese medicine or naturopathy that has shaped your understanding of freedom, or even just what does it mean to you now? Because we even said earlier that we were at a freedom festival.
Yeah.
It is one of those words that has at least as many meanings as there are people in this world. And the invitation from my friend and teacher Edmund Knighton that we were all offered at Confluence this year and beyond is, I love how many times he came back to in his talk, and certainly at the very beginning of it, to ask, what does it mean to even feel 1% more free
Hmm.
in your body? And I think that is an excellent place to start for anyone. And you can either follow that track or just in general is what has freedom come to mean to you?
Beautiful. Yeah, I've got this little section on the bookshelf here of kind of the Steiner material, and we even
Mm.
have Philosophy of Freedom. This text that you can come back to time and time and time again and still not understand, at least
Yeah.
from my understanding.
Well, and I'll speak to that only briefly because I
Yeah,
think you
please.
mentioned this when you were staring at the wall and you didn't even have the filter to process what it was that you were looking at.
Right.
And I learned this from Edmund on down through, or Steiner on down through Edmund
Yeah.
Knighton, my friend and teacher, with whom we're doing the program. As you know, he's leading that because it's his creative spirit that has manifested all of that. And he does such a superb job of constantly reminding us that what's important is the engagement. The meaning making is, most of us are usually trained to try to do that from the shoulders up. And good fucking luck with that because there's enough faulty programming and lenses with which we would depend on our above the shoulder faculties. It doesn't mean it's going to be like that forever, which is why Steiner encourages us to practice our clear and sharp thinking and start to develop those faculties. What I mean is that if we're vulnerable to the obsession of I need to make meaning, especially on the first read, especially if on your first encounter with what Tommy and I are saying,
Hmm.
or with Steiner material, or the idea of terrain, if your obsession is to make meaning of that immediately, then we're usually missing the forest through the trees. So I use that point as an emphatic punctuation of what you're saying, which is when you read something like Steiner's work, the idea of, oh my gosh, I'm going to be introduced to a philosophy of freedom. It's really not required that you have the ability to make your precise meaning of it. It's more important that the words filter through you,
Mm,
and some part of you, some deeper part of you, is going to be able to start the process of whether it's meaning making or just utility making. Trust that there's parts of you that are doing that. That's
beautiful.
my coaching reminder for the day to myself and to you and to all of us.
Yeah, thank you very much for that
Yeah.
reminder. It's certainly the resonance I feel with it, and certainly the process that I've taken, and especially reading his material as well as reading, obscure ancient text and things like that,
Yeah,
sort
I'm
of
sure.
appealing. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, back to this idea, for at least for informed from my kind of the Chinese medical background and the martial tradition, this idea of freedom. Certainly, there's a body felt sense in that of, in Chinese, we talk a lot about from a health point, the the opposite of health being that of obstruction, or modern term folks like to use is stagnation. So this idea of
Mhm.
stagnation, and a lot of times we think of that just on the physical level. The channels are stagnant, the organs, the fluids, the feelings, the emotions, etc. But on a deep core aspect of one's being, the life force, the what we call a very important type of chi, the jung chi. Jung means like upright. The picture of the character is like an individual between heaven and earth and a straight line in between. So this idea of what I understand that to mean is this upright aspect. One is upright in sort of the from macrocosm to microcosm, standing in this upright position, connected between the two, in alignment with the creator, etc. And so when we can tap into that feeling, there's a great sense of what I would call freedom in that, and this unobstructed nature of that deeper connection. And that requires, at least in my life, from what I've understood and developed around freedom and the ideas, is great. We go back to this, we've already talked about this, but great responsibility. I think that's even I think that's even a famous phrase, or you know, the idea of with great power comes great responsibility. We could also say with great freedom comes great responsibility, because there is that sort of more luciferic side of freedom that we might observe, especially at festivals and things,
Mhm.
where it's sort of like, oh, yeah, I'm free, I'm going to leave the system, and all of this, but then all of a sudden it comes back to the natural needs of the human, of food and shelter and water and all of that.
And yeah, and as Topher said, I think at the beginning of his talk at Confluence,
Yeah,
no one's an island. You cannot,
right,
go construct and then go live on your island. If it's that type of freedom you're looking for,
right,
good luck, because what is it that will support you and nourish you? Because we all have our weaknesses, frailties, liabilities, blind spots, all of that. No one can do everything. Grow their own food, treat their own water,
right.
navigate the weather, all of that. So I'm with you that does strike me as highly luciferic to think it's total exit,
Right.
total removal, and therefore unburdening of the inconvenience of being with other people.
Right. And yeah, and lastly, I'll just say, is, to me, freedom is a verb more so, in that sense that it's a practice, a daily practice, one's daily practice, that so many other aspects of our being feed into that great wellspring source of what we might call freedom. So the tributaries and streams that lead to and from it are through practices on the physical level, on the mental level, on the spiritual, etc. And that's a development and a nurturing of this gentle inner flame that we might view as freedom. And so it can be a daily practice, even with one being in a prison. These are kind of this Chinese idea of some of these Taoist texts and things. Even one being in a prison, there can still be an aspect of freedom in there. It's one's inner understanding and felt sense of what that is. So even when life circumstances come our way that might seem difficult or constricting, it's the aspect of one's being and response to those rather than one's reaction. One's response and way of being with that, that I think develops even more so that freedom. So still an obscure, can't nail it right on the head definition for it, but more of a philosophy and understanding and a feeling for me. Mm.
I'm so happy I asked, and so thankful for the way you approached that, and for all of the all of the pillars with which we've used to build this conversation here to Tommy, I believe each one deserves its own deep dive, and I know we'll take advantage of the opportunity to do that again soon. And as we land this plane, I'll ask you, because this is home court health, what is something you've done recently for your home, for your personal terrain, your physical terrain, where you and Sophia are building a home, and I know you have many irons in the fire there. What's an investment or a shift that you've made in the physical space of your home that is bringing you greater peace and nourishment? Because that's what that place is meant to be. It's meant to be the place where you go to regenerate. So yeah, what's something you've done lately at home?
Yeah, absolutely. I I built an adult bunk bed.
Proud of you. Proud of you.
So
Why?
so the idea here
Is
is,
it for the two of you?
yeah, yep. So
Fuck yeah.
somewhat of a small space. We live on a family farm, and there's a transition period for us. So we're very fortunate here to be with my parents in their newly built location, and then eventually we'll be building our own from natural materials and things. So we have to make best use of the space that we are so beautifully allotted. And I said, we've got this beautiful organic wool carpet in there, and we just sleep on the floor, just on a futon. But I was like, I think we can make this into layers, and it should be really fun. I had a bunk bed when I was a kid, so I built a really sturdy, hardcore, all natural materials and untreated wood bunk bed. Top is the sleeping, below for stretching and relaxing and sitting, and then you can alternate depending on how you feel sleep-wise. But for us, that brings freedom and joy and fun and excitement. So that's another aspect of it, let alone the materials it's built of, just the excitement around it. So that was what comes to mind.
Oh, that's marvelous fun. See, I was thinking based on Topher's encouragement
Yeah.
that you each had your own bed in the bunk bed to further charge the polarity. So something to revisit, something to consider for sure, as I know you are.
Absolutely.
And what about a court? And when I ask people about the court, I mean, is there a field of endeavor or competition that you're currently engaged in that is inspiring you to excel? I love the quote from Robin Williams, Professor Keating in Dead Poets Society, when he talks about that devotees may argue that one sport is better than the other. For me, the best part of sport is that it induces others to push us to excel. So do you have any sports that you play? Is it in the gym? Is it a particular pursuit where you are being moved to another expression of performance and excellence right now?
Yeah, interestingly enough, recently it's been more on the mental plane.
Yeah.
So it's been more in this terrain world of like farther defining terms, and perhaps in the future we'll discuss this, and folks can refer to your previous podcast with Topher and some of the material he's recently put out. But in the terrain world, really diving deep again into, okay, what's our foundations? Where does this come from? And how are we defining terms? And farther elucidating, going farther now into the questioning process, and really thinking back, what does cause illness? How do we fall out of balance? Responsibility, awareness, other, outside, all these terms, what does that mean? So recently I've been pushed through others, great minds, greater than I, on really coming back to and analyzing that, thinking about it, exercising, wrestling with it. So it's been more so on the mental plane recently.
Cool. That's a worthy arena, is the mental
Yeah.
arena of clarity and that sort of education. And finally, you have that splendid expression over your shoulder. The terrain is everything.
Yep.
What is something you've done and I like to qualify this as something you've done or started doing or stopped doing that you know for certain, because this had previously been my issue with supplements, is at the time when I was taking
Yeah.
however many supplements, how the hell are you ever going to know when one is working? Ideally you feel that boost. Now there's nothing I take every day.
Right.
I mean, I've had Shilajit before. I'm trying to think. There's nothing I take. I mean, I'm scout. I used to have a whole drawer full of supplements,
Yeah.
and I mean, there's still some in there. I mean, there's homeopathic remedies in there, and maybe there's some mushroom extract, but there's nothing I take every day. So, when or if I introduce something, that will be my test to say that this is you're providing, and there's different buckets, especially of supplementation. I think of somewhat emergency supplements. If you need, generally need to detox, there's performance supplements, which we can talk about another time. Performance does not equal health and vitality, especially for the give and take. And then there's maybe specialty supplements, the people like biooptimizers out there who, are I ostensibly are providing formulae that help you with your uptake and assimilation. Allegedly, we'll come back to that another time. But for your terrain, Tommy, what are the things you've either started or stopped doing recently that you have reaped the immense vitality from?
Wonderful. I think you and I are fellow travelers on the same path there, coming from, certainly a background and being privileged to grow up and being brought to all these classes and seminars, and early on in the holistic natural world, it's all supplements, herbs, all that. So there's some beauty to that. It's a time and place for certain things. And so for a long time, like you, it's like kind of a potpourri of all this mix.
Yep.
What really brought me, though, into my answer, which is actually my answer would be less is more in the removal of things from my terrain. And that is the natural law concepts of like really everything I need is right here. And also, if I'm to believe in the idea of the healing power of nature, if I'm to live, that's another Paul Chek kind of thing, I think. If I'm really living that, I've been experimenting with less and less and less from food, mineral supplement, liquid, external nourishment to what am I starting to analyze on the natural level, on the etheric level, on the energetic level, nourishing the body. And when I develop more inner freedom, what does that look like for the physical health? So for me lately, for nourishing the terrain, it's been a less is more approach and experimenting with that and feeling what that feels like.
And that really is a stellar and perfect punctuation to what has been one of my favorite conversations for sure. I mean, I really do feel like I was a listener to this and being able to drink from the draft of the full cup that you just shared with me. So thank you, Tommy. I'll make sure that people know that you are Naturally Tom, and certainly anywhere to find you, and we'll follow up on this because there is, as always, you're a deep cat, and there's many more depths to explore together if you're willing and able. So I thank you for your time and energy today, my friend.
Yeah, thank you very much. In Chinese we have a concept, yuan fin. It means sort of like destined to meet, destined to connection. So how beautiful it was to go to Confluence, not just for what we thought was a fun experience, but to meet folks like yourself and develop that connection. So I'm grateful and blessed to have met you, and through Sophia, how divine that is. And I'm a fan of home court health. Through that I've found your pod. I always enjoy your discussions. You're just fantastic at questions and discussion and keeping that going. So I greatly value your time and appreciate you having me on. Folks, yeah, like you said, look for Tom on mine. Let's keep this conversation going. I want to have you on and get to your story as well. With such a interesting way of being right now. I'd love to hear your backstory as well. So I look forward to that and continued conversation, friendship, discussion, pushing each other in the sense of development as well. I think I really am looking for that next level too on the masculine side as well. And we certainly all have some really wonderful people in our circles in that way. So what an honor to be here today. Thank you so much, Tom. It's good to see you and chat with you.
It surely was. And I'm so glad, yes, we had the place to meet old friends for the first time.
Yes.
And I fully accept all of those invitations from you. So let's keep building, brother.
Beautiful. Thank you.